G'day, I'm Gavin from Hurley's Fly Fishing. If fly fishing is something you want to get into, you want to do a course with us. We'll take you up to New G and we'll teach you how to catch trout. $99, get in touch with us and we'll teach you how to be a superstar fly fisher. And when we're talking about loops, we're imagining something like that, a nice tight little loop. So that's where all that force is going to go, in a nice little straight line. That does, you can imagine if you're throwing a dart, it's going to go very straight line because you're pushing it forward with all the maximum force going that way. So we want very tight little loops, and that's going to allow your fly line to get much further, much faster, particularly if there's a bit of wind around. Okay. What we also have is what we call a false cast, and that's literally just keeping the line up in the air. So we'll do that for a couple of reasons. The same technique, get to that one false cast and just come down with it. That can do a few things. If you've got a dry fly, a couple of casts like that's going to dry it out and put it back on the water and float really well. You can also use that to gain a little bit of extra distance. As you go, you can let out a little bit more line, and that can give you like a greater distance to cast a lot further. Now, one of the big problems we see with beginners is they use too much wrist at the start. What we also have, we have a casting aid, and that literally locks the butt of the fly rod onto your wrist there and keeps it very stiff, so you're not using too much wrist. So there's something you can buy, like little training wheels to get you started and get you using like the correct casting arc until you get the hang of it by yourself. So there's always going to be things, you're not going to pick it up straight away with everything, but just persist or come into our shop and we can sort of help you out as well and point you in the right direction, because once you get the hang of this fly rod, you're going to catch a lot more fish and have a real lot of fun. Well, that concludes our casting. We've just come down onto the water here. There's a little catch and release area here with some moving water, which is a great way to show you a few techniques on how to fish either a river or lake differently. Now, it's all pretty good. Once you get to a bit of water, we use the word stop a lot, and that's what needs to happen when you do get to some water like this. So you've got to get there, don't tie the fly on, on the way to the river or anything like that. Get there and have a look what's around. You might find that there's, plenty of insects hatching, or might be grasshoppers about, or even nothing. But trout in particular, they're always going to be eating, and they're always going to be on the lookout for something that's going to attack them. So they're always going to be scared. So what you're going to look for is little signs of the fish feeding. If you can't see anything, then you might look to tie on different flies, be it nymphs or even streamers, just to put something in front of them that they're more than likely to eat. It's very important to have a decent set of glasses, and that helps to see the fish just under the surface or any structure. There might be trees in the water or logs or rocks and things like that. And a decent set of glasses, I use Mako because I find they're the best. In a brown lens is just ideal for your freshwater fishing. So get the best pair you can buy, and they're going to look after you and make you much more successful on the water. Now we're going to start off with a dry fly. Now that can imitate perhaps a nymph that's swum to the surface, hatched out and turned into a dun or a mayfly. It could be like something that's jumped in from the land, whether it be a grasshopper, a cricket or a moth or something like that. And essentially something that's just going to float. As you can imagine, with a little fly like this, we've got to put movement into that would happen naturally. So with a tiny little mayfly, that would actually just float with the current. If it was a grasshopper, it might kick its legs a little bit. You want to impose about the same sort of movement as would naturally. So the trout are going to be facing upstream. So we're going to cast that fly upstream, and that's going to drift back towards where the fish is. And a couple of things to remember once we do that. It's called line management, and this is very important. It's all well and good having great casting and all that sort of stuff, but once that fly hits the water, that's when the real action starts, and it's imperative that you do things properly. So what we need to do, if a fish takes that, if you're using a worm, for example, you put it in his mouth and he'll realise that's food and he'll eat it. With a fly, he'll realise pretty quickly that that's a bit of metal and fur and feather, and he's not going to eat it, and he'll spit that back out. So what we need to do is set the hook pretty well straight away. So as soon as that goes in that fish's mouth, we've got to lift the rod, not like a big snapper strike, but literally just lift it maybe a foot until that line's tight, and that will set the hook and you're ready to play that fish. Right, now when we cast out upstream, and that's going to drift back towards us. Now, depends on how fast the water's going, but very quickly that line is going to bunch up right down at the end of my rod tip. So if a fish is to take that now, I've got to lift before I'm even moving the flight. All that sort of distance before that set the hook. And that for a trout is enough time for it to spit it. It's called line management. And I've got to get that line inside of these guides before the fish takes that fly. So it's simply a matter of casting out. You want the rod tip right low by the water, and any slack build up, you're going to pull that in through your fingers here. So as soon as that fish takes, you lift that rod like maybe a foot and you've set the hook already. So just pays to be ready when that fish does take. Right, so we've just got a dry fly now. We're just going to throw this as far upstream and watch that fly like a hook and get that drift back. And hopefully there's a fish there that's looking up. You're pulling in slack the whole time whilst watching that fly. So you've got a few things to think about, but they're all good things to think about. Watch the fly like a hawk. Just out of your side vision, I guess, you're just watching this line to strip in. So as soon as that's taken, you can strike. And you can let it drift the whole way down. Depending on where you are in a river, you could let it drift the whole way down. As long as you haven't scared any of these fish, that's still very fishable water. So what we'd normally do, you've probably seen as well on a few of our other shows, where we'll put things into a grid system. So we would look at a certain area and perhaps start it over there and let it drift down through one little area. And if that doesn't hold a fish that's come up to strike, we might cast another foot to the right, to the right, to the right, and just work your way along so you're covering all sections of the river. And then you might take another couple of metres further upstream and then cast again. So you're really putting your fly over all parts of the river and giving every fish that's there a chance to eat your fly. That dry fly, and you want them, as soon as they take that in the mouth, you've got to set that hook just as it comes back towards you. And that's what it's about. It's with a dry fly, you're just going to throw it out to where you think there's going to be fish, and that will generally float back downstream towards you. As soon as he takes it, you've got to strike. There's all this time. A lot will tell you, God save the Queen, and you wait a little bit for him to grab it and turn down. But I'm also of the opinion, by the time it takes for that to happen, he's got time enough to spit the hook out. So if you're definitely behind him, I'd give him a strike straight away, and you get a lovely little fish on the dry fly. We'll get him out. Just a nice little rainbow. Perfect. Get him back in. That's a typical size that you get in a lot of these Australian rivers and that as well. So beautiful little fish on the dry fly.